I'm Catalin. I'm a postdoc in neuroscience, one of the people that, along with Esben, set up this Agency Foundations Challenge. I work at NYU and University of Basel, where I'm local to Switzerland now.
Cool. My name is Tim. I'm a PhD student in computer science, more specifically in kind of multi-agent systems and reinforcement learning in Oxford. And I've also worked on topics that are similar to the topics we're thinking about in the hackathon. And yeah, very excited to see what people are coming up with and happy to help.
Yeah, sure, I can. And Tim, please feel free to jump in. I think I don't have a monopoly on the answer for all these questions. So the hackathon had, we did a keynote talk, and I perhaps didn't give the most broad, philosophically kind of based conception of agency. So the way I usually present, I give talks usually separate on agency as opposed to this hackathon, but the way I usually present these more science or biology-based talks around agency, I say, look, agency is two kinds of concepts, at least in biology. There's this, especially in psychology, right? If you Google what is agency, Google will tell you it's the sense of control. The first question, the first line in Google search, right, will be it's the feeling of control over actions, right? So there's this phenomenological component that we kind of have. It's very central to human beings, and without speculating too much, I think it is probably one of the most important things that human beings experience in the world. That we are a self, and we kind of, the thoughts we have and the behaviors we have are like kind of ours. There's some kind of locus of causality within us. So there's this phenomenological component. I sometimes speculate and say that I think that there's a lot of researchers trying to figure out what consciousness is, and I feel like the people working on agency will probably figure that out first, because it's more operationalized. It's like there's a feeling and you can look for it in the brain, etc. So I can talk about it some other time, but the other part is the scarier part. I think is the ones related to AI safety. So the other part is the causality part, and it's basically more related. Maybe it's easier for people to understand from CS and engineering and AI development, and it relates to what causes actions, right? So I feel like I am a whole person. I have these thoughts that come to me, and I feel that I'm in control over my actions on a daily basis, and my plans and thoughts and so on. I use reasons, I use symbolic manipulation, etc., to achieve things. But it's not completely clear what this chain of causality is. How do thoughts come to me? I'm obviously an organism, a biological organism that's evolved over a very long time. So there's all these genetic factors in biological ones, developmental, environmental, etc. So the causality part is what worries me. As a neuroscientist, and I've been working on this for almost a decade now, trying to figure out this chain of causality between information coming in, memories, short-term, long-term, and manipulation technologies that kind of act on our lives increasingly. Can those things, and how do they affect, first of all, behavior, and how far can we take this kind of causal influence or causal perturbation in biological organisms? I use a bunch of tools and stuff, and I'm happy to talk about it. But the big picture really is that agency is a feeling, and agency is really causality. What is causing things to happen in the world? So yeah, I hope that helps a little bit.
Nice. And Tim, do you have any comments on that, or your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, so my background in the topic, or how I got in touch with this, was that I actually worked on a project, I think about 1.5 years or 2 years back, where we were trying to think about the question of how can I help another agent without understanding what the agent's goals are. And the idea is here, can we support another agent by just kind of giving it more options, or giving it more choice, or kind of empowering it to do more things. And then basically, if I'm the one that's being helped, if I have someone else that gives me more choice, then basically this will enable me to kind of better achieve my goals, because I would be in a better position to achieve these goals, because I now have more things to choose from. So the idea here was can we be helpful to others by taking actions that increase the choice that others have? And back then we defined this choice as kind of like the number of states that kind of an agent can reach in a world. So for example, as an easy intuitive thing here is imagine you're trapped somewhere where there's a lot of doors and they're all closed and you can't open them, then it might be beneficial to you if someone else just comes and opens all the doors, and then you can basically now choose where you want to go, and you can kind of like discover spaces, or you can go to places that you couldn't go to before. And then we got in touch with Catalin because we figured that this is actually kind of similar to his ideas around agency, because now if we look at the idea of like decreasing agency of others, this would basically mean taking choice away from them. So if I take actions that decrease agency, then this is kind of the opposite of what we had been looking into in our paper. We would not increase the choice of others, but we would decrease the choice of others. And there, from a more theoretical perspective, there's one thing which is basically choice, which is kind of like how many states can I reach? But then there's a also very interesting concept in the literature, which is called empowerment, which not only refers to what's the quantity of things that I can reach, but also kind of what is the controllability that I can have over the world. Because it might be that I can reach many things, but I don't have control about which things I will actually reach. So what we want to have is we want to be able to reach many things, and we also want to be in control of what we reach. And this has been very interesting because we've basically been thinking about, can we think about agency as the empowerment of an agent from a more theoretical perspective?
Nice. Yeah, I think the Oxford Dictionary also mentions that free will is something like the ability to pick a choice among multiple choices. And then in this case, I guess agency would be set up as increasing that amount of choices and how well you can manipulate that environment.
Yeah, I would say it's a little more than that. So I think that's kind of maybe it's the first simplification we need to make, and people working on trying to formalize agency now, they start to think about increased autonomy. But it's not as simple as that. It's a little bit more complicated because we can obviously have more choices that are not really as fulfilling, whatever that might mean for everyone. So you can always have more increased choices, more autonomy, ability to do things, but you can be disempowered at the same time. You can become a person that doesn't have, like the way I express it in the hackathon was, you don't have economic, political, or social agency. And to me, it's not really speculation. It really seems like where our human technology goes. Just to finish up this thought, it seems to me like we want to. There's value in having power and control over humans and over societies, and it's like that's probably what the types of tools that we're building, the technologies, the AI and ML, are going to push us in this direction. There's no way. It's very valuable to know what people are going to do, to know what corporations are going to do, and try to manipulate or control that. So it's scary if these tools become too powerful, and it's scary if an AGI, homes in on the strategy, right? If it identifies a strategy.
Yep. One thing I'd be curious to transition a bit into would be to chat about which sort of projects we would expect to see from each of the categories. And Corey, you're very welcome to jump in with any questions as well regarding either your project or any other questions you might have. But before that, I guess we can check out, and you both mentioned a bit the opening doors and how agency depletion happens. But what are some real world examples of AI and ML systems that have enhanced or depleted human agency? I guess there's some reinforcement learning on recommendation systems, and maybe soon there's cognitive decline due to us relying on ChatGPT too much or something like that.
Maybe I can go second. You guys can, if you want to pitch in.
Someone go ahead. I'm curious, Esben, what were you thinking of?
Yeah, I mean, so some of these, I guess the clear example we see today and that has received a lot of attention is just social media and how TikTok sort of hijacks your attention in a big way and depletes your agency in some ways in terms of restricting implicitly which sort of choices you can take because it makes you addicted to the algorithm itself. Whatever that might be, and this is of course the case for many of these algorithms, and something that I've also been personally worried about, right? There's a lot of value in a lot of these videos and a lot of these algorithms being like, the YouTube algorithm helps you a lot in learning a topic very well because it dives deeper and deeper, but it also helps them earn ad revenue. So there's a bit of an incentive skew on the agency control there of whoever the users are. So that would be like a good example that is quite influential today, I'd say.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting example. Yeah, because it's also interesting to think about it from a perspective of saying, you would always assume that if something takes away my choice, there has to be, so to say, physical interaction. But if you think about it from the perspective that you just brought up, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and at least I would imagine that this would happen a lot with AGI systems too, that we would see, a subtle depletion of human agency that we wouldn't necessarily notice. And then the actual obvious ones would be these physical interaction related choice reduction schemes, or whatever you'd call that. Because if you just maximize something like TikTok today, you could probably do even more as an AGI than ByteDance can.
Yeah, I guess there's like there might even be middle ground. Is like if you have like some personal assistant installed on your computer that basically reduces the amount of applications you have on your home screen to whatever it thinks is really necessary to you. This is kind of an intermediate step because you could probably still like start them from somewhere else, but most likely I'm just going to go with the 3 that it offers me and then pick one of those without kind of like making the additional effort of going back into my program folder and trying to find stuff that it doesn't really think I would want in this moment.
Yeah, I was
gonna
go ahead.
Sorry, you can finish your thought, because I'm going to take it a different
direction.
No,
that was my thought actually.
Nice. Yeah, I can add that. Like I was a game developer earlier, and did some of the design as well, and there was a lot of just controlling or guiding the human, which in a negative term can be called controlling or reducing their implicit choice by changing the user experience of actually going through a level or going through a world, and implicitly teaching them about the ways to interact with the game. But that could just as well be implemented in a way that like, oh, now they don't realize, even though there are all these choices, they're gonna do some sort of soft max on the thing that the AGI wants them to take on, without them actually noticing. Like you're gonna end up with a much higher probability in that, just because there's some nudging mechanisms. So
yes. So my response would be, I'll take it a little bit, maybe in a different direction. So I think both Eliza Yudkowsky and I think just about everybody, I'm not as well read as others. It's definitely Paul Cristiano and what failure looks like. He had a couple of posts on this. They talk about the various scenarios of depleting human power, human choices that are in control over the world, right? And it's a slow-moving train wreck or whatever you want to call it. But I think there's a misconception that, not a misconception, sorry, I shouldn't say that. We don't have answers. I gotta just probably make it clear that I'm not extremely confident in extrapolating so far in advance. But the way to think about it for me is very helpful to think about this chess playing kind of paradigm or analogy. So playing chess with an AGI, right, or super AGI, something that's extremely powerful and it can model a lot of things. It can model your behavior, right? And this idea that we're worried right now, at least that everybody's worried about the fast takeoff, something goes wrong, stochastic gradient descent gives us a monster and it really harms humanity. And the types of things I talk about and maybe the misuse people talk about, it's slow, it's bad, intentional bad things, but there's an in-between place. And that in-between place is that, would you be able to tell, this is what the agency singularity is, would you be able to tell when an AGI is setting you up, right? Would you be able to tell when you are actually past this inflection point where you literally cannot do anything anymore, right? As a human, as a society, or as whatever you want to call it, as a civilization, because the singularity idea is just this kind of tool to think about that. If you're playing a game, which is with a new organism or new species, and that species is extremely more powerful than you, then it's silly to think that you can anticipate what it's going to do, especially if it starts to build. This is why I'm so interested in quantifying agency inside language models and the future AI tools that we have. So it's a bit silly to think that we can plan for things. If you think about it in that paradigm, could I the chess playing AGI moves the pawn, and like why did it do that? Right? Maybe it's trying to trap me. It really understands that I'm going to think in a certain way, and then 55 moves down. Later, it's like, okay, this is now you're trapped. You lost. Okay, so it's very hard when you're playing these competing. You have your own war model and that in the hackathon keynote and some of the other, like even the paper that's at the core of this hackathon or challenge, I talk about why I think language model emergent harmful behaviors really are agency depletion, or really related to agency depletion. So language models that lie to us, they're creating this frontier, right? They're creating this event horizon. So we can tell when they lie to us. What's 55 divided by 73? We know the answer to that. And if they're wrong, then we say, aha, you're wrong. But we don't know other types of things. There's a lot of the questions we want solved, we don't know the answers to, and it becomes difficult as we correct them. And again, I'm far from the only person to point this out. So sycophancy, deception, sandbagging, these kinds of things are like obvious, or at least at some level obvious, but eventually they won't become obvious. Eventually they'll become strategies that look like that, that have consequences that we can't really anticipate. And this is what we have to think about. It's in between slow takeoff and fast takeoff scenario. Really, you don't really know where you are. And again, I'm not the first person to say this. I know people have also said we can't really tell from where we are.
Yeah, so you end up with something along the lines of humans not realizing what the AI is doing to them, and because we cannot control it, like there's missing human oversight, and it's also too high dimensional, and
you can't model it exactly, and you can't really
Yeah. Nice. Well, let's jump through each category of projects and just shortly chat about it, and then we can do a little ending and stop the live stream there, but maybe stay a bit in chat. So the first one is this agency preserving reinforcement learning, and I'm sure Tim, you have a bunch of comments there. Kat, you can of course also say anything, but maybe just give it a short intro, like a couple sentences, and then we can chat about the sort of projects we might expect to see from this at the end of the challenge.
Yeah, cool, definitely.
I can give the overview, Tim, if you want. On the website, I had an easy and a hard category, and then I hope that was somewhat clear to people. And then Tim can talk about his researches. Maybe I can also go at the end. Maybe I'll do that, Tim. Sorry.
No, you go ahead. I think that makes more sense, actually.
Okay, so I had this was probably one of the more exciting areas, along with, well, not exciting, the one that I understand a little better, and it was the idea, like, can we quantify agency, and what the heck is it, and can we, even if we have simplified paradigms, can we do it? Tim and his group have done a bit, and then going back to these entropy methods sound really cool and promising, and I would like for people to do more. You really need to push this much more, I think, to see what the fruitful outcome is. And the hard questions were same thing, but now can you define agency in the presence of, like, I don't know, X actors or X agents, and for indefinite horizons. How the heck do we think about human utopias? What is it that we want at the end of the day? And it's not clear what that is. That becomes very complicated very quickly. I'm hoping somebody submits on this topic. I would be very excited to see it. Of the hard problem of agency, like figuring out something that humanity's never really figured out. So that's kind of roughly what I was waiting for.
Yeah, so to some degree, I guess what you're looking for there is some sort of reward function or a loss that has quantified agency, either on the short term or like technical short term easy problem, or for the whole of humanity, whatever that multifaceted reward model might look like.
Yeah, something along those lines, yes. And then Tim hopefully can help us with the first one, at least.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. We were thinking, and like some people already reached out, and I guess there's some interesting ideas out there. Is like similar to the ideas that kind of represented back then in the paper, taking that as a starting point. Now, if we look at agency preserving RL, back then we were basically only thinking about increasing agency, and we also showed like how this, like, kind of, if you blindly increase choices of people, and that's actually not what they're really looking for. Like, they want to have little choice, then they might not find that desirable. But the question is now, could you basically combine two ideas? So could I kind of, like, if I know the goals or the reward function of another agent, and I also want to kind of like help this agent, but at the same time I want to maximize its agency, or kind of at least make sure I don't deplete its agency, can I look kind of into, so to say, constraint optimization problems there, where I can basically say, hey, I'm gonna aid you in the tasks that I think you wish to achieve, while making sure that your ability to control the world does not go below a certain threshold. And then the other idea that people, I think, have also been working on is saying, okay, we back then have been looking into this kind of like choice framework, where we just look at counting states, and we don't really look at controllability. So now if we look at the empowerment framework, then another way is also not to just take into account choice, but also to take into account and somehow estimate the controllability that an agent has over its world.
Yeah.
Yeah, very excited to see what's coming.
Yeah.
So Tim,
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to clarify. Did people reach out for better code? I thought I saw some discussions and.
Yeah, some people reach out for code. Some people just asked about questions, kind of saying, "Hey, what do you think about this idea? Does this make sense?" Yeah, can you get back to
mini grid is some
this
package that you guys use. What is that exactly?
It's actually a package that we didn't use back then because it wasn't out yet, but it is like a very frequently used package that has been put out by, I think, by Meta Research, and it's been used in a lot of research papers. It's very, very easy to get started with.
Very nice.
And therefore I think it's kind of a good starting point here.
Nice. Wonderful. Yeah, so you would imagine that you'd see someone formalize this sort of multifaceted reward function or any regularization on agency or something like
I mean,
that.
I don't want to say I expect anyone to do this, but I'm just saying these are interesting things that I think could be followed up on, and we'll see what people come up with. And it seemed like there were some ideas around there. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
Very nice.
And Kat, do you have any expectations for the hard problem as well? I guess these were more on the.
My expectation, my hope is that at least one or two people will write, even if it's. I mean, I know it's late in the game, and I'm not sure who's going to watch our commentary now, but at least some people take a crack at it and say, "Hey, this is intractable, and we need." It's really. Some of the answers are like that. You know, there are pessimistic views out there, but I would like for someone to say, hopefully one or two people to at least think about it, maybe in the context of the easy problem, to say this is the way you would try to extend it to the multi-agent. I'm hoping people take a shot at it, because without it, I think it's important to think about it.
Yeah, look at the bigger picture of it. Awesome. And for the interpretability of agency in neural networks, and I guess that even goes for brains, but I guess fewer had access to that. But maybe a short introduction from you, Kat, on this.
Yeah, I mean, that was this is my my budding, growing expertise. I'm slowly getting into figuring out how to use the tools of developmental and systems neuroscience that I'm somewhat good at to apply to artificial neural networks to kind of guide our direction for research, or my direction for research, I should say. So I suggested in the keynote that there was a couple of things we could try. We definitely do a lot of behavior stuff. We can just query these models and just try to figure out how do they understand the world. Do they partition the world in Daniel Dennett's kind of intentional stance kind of view, and can we do more with that? Do they attribute harm? I didn't talk about this, but the question is, you could do queries where you try to figure out if the language models understand harmful capacities are. Do they have a special space for those, the way they're represented? And by this I mean just doing a little bit of mech-ins, but maybe just at the logic there, just the output of the language model, and looking at like the top 10, 20, 30 most likely next tokens or subject matters, and trying to understand those in that mostly behavior-driven approach. On the other side was the more kind of deeper interpretability, and there I suggested to just try to track some of these capacities through the language models. I don't know how hard it is to. We can't do a lot with GPT 3.5 and 4, but definitely some of the open source models, you could definitely try to figure out a view of these capacities, whether they are the intentional stance capacities or just the model's abilities to represent the world, and the subjects in it, and how those kind of evolve over time, I guess.
Yeah, and we also do have. I still have access to replicate.ai if anyone's looking for that.
Okay.
With access to the llama models and whatnot. Well, I think you'd probably have to go full in on applying on the Meta website for getting access to the weights, but otherwise that's still there. Yeah.
But that only takes a minute or two.
Exactly.
That's only accepted very quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe it's approved by llama. Who knows? Goes through the
Sure. Maybe.
Likely.
Yeah.
Or maybe they use some kind of naive Bayesian classifier. It's all naive Bayesian classifiers at the end, like just like spam.
Yeah. Instead of using this tech they've developed, they're just like,
yes.
you know what? Going full academia. Yeah, and so you expect to see these sorts of logic attribution experiments, and
I'm hoping I'm open. Like and again, now we have what, like a dozen judges. So my whatever my evaluation or my comments on the submissions will be 1/10 probably, or whatever, 1/4, 1/5 of the final mark. So whatever other, of course, reviewers are interested in, hopefully it will pan out.
nice. Yeah, it's at least very interesting always to see sort of how does behavior and neural cognition or neural functioning actually attribute to each other in agency.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Tim, do you have any thoughts here, or otherwise we can jump on?
Sorry, I had to mute myself. There's some background noise here. I'm happy to go on and jump on to the next one.
Nice. Yeah, so the third category is this limits to value learning, and a bit of this reinforcement learning from human feedback. We're doing a lot of what are the limits of that compared to actually preserving human agency and ensuring that we get some good function there. And now I started the introduction already, but go ahead, Kat.
Yeah, so now that you put it this way, I think during the keynote I didn't really discuss fine-tuning language models, but probably you could do that. You could probably develop a paradigm where you try to figure out, can you fine-tune language models to be more, I mean, I know people are doing this more ethical, be more moral, to start to understand agency and the agents in the world that they presumably represent. But initially, I thought about a much more kind of traditional classical. At least there was two suggestions. The classical traditional thing that basic scientists do, and I think maybe Tim's lab also seemed to be at least somewhat interested in this, to try to figure out, if you have a lot of empirical data, a lot of behavior data, can you actually construct reward functions and policies? And we're getting there. I think machine vision. I work with rodents and non-human animals sometimes, but those tools are getting better, and we're going to have a lot of data from non-human animals, but also humans we already have, and we're going to start to fitting models and etc. And are these models really giving us what we want? Because sometimes if you just observe some organism doing something, it's just, you don't really have access to their internal states. You don't really know, if you don't have some kind of prior on what the things they want and they really desire, etc. You might not get a very good accurate sense of what their really values and what they really want and desire from the world. So I was hoping to just have an empirical. There was at least one person or two that were interested in this, so I shared some data with them. And the other part was the crazier one, the more speculative one, I would say, where you would do the same thing, but now you would, instead of looking at empirical data, you would just look at some simulated agents and try to do the same thing. Can you learn the values of simulated agents by observing their behavior? But now maybe you can have access to their internal states. Maybe the way I try to explain it or hand wave it is the generative processes that give rise to the behavior, like a neural network from which that implements the policy of the agent that you're observing, right? So you're trying to learn what this agent in the environment does, but you also have access not just to this behavior, but this internal states. This kind of stuff is related to my fears about, of course, having real-time access to biometric and neural data for humans. It will be able to create increasingly powerful predictive models of behavior, and is a little bit scary. So I was trying to nudge people to think a little bit more creatively. I think last year I had pitched part of this to by pitched, I mean I had sent an email to Chai, the people in I guess in San Francisco or Berkeley, I forgot where they are. And I think there was some interest there, but we went back and forth, and I ended up not being able to set up a call with Andrew or someone else from that group. But I think in principle this is coming, and I think Andrew actually had published a paper on. It was a very interesting paper on, actually. He said that corporate governance documents are essentially a type of internal knowledge of an entity's whatever you want to call it, future behavior. So that was an interesting thing, but to look at. So that was. I hope that's not too confusing, but those are the two major ideas I was hoping to promote, and anything related to them, of course.
Yeah. So having our models actually reflect the sort of future behavior of biological systems, and understanding the dynamisms that happen there, or the mechanisms underlying this behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Tim, do you have any comments on?
Yeah.
in this social learning?
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting direction, because I assume value learning or also adversary reinforcement learning is normally kind of just concerned with learning high-level objectives of people. So like, I want object X, or I want object Y, or I want first object X and then object Y. But this often doesn't really reflect, or the idea of trying to reflect that I maybe want this object, but I also want to maintain my choice, and I don't want anyone to hand this to me, but I still want to be in charge of choosing. This is, I think, a very interesting thought, which also I hadn't had before engaging in these topics and talking to Catalin. Yeah, and I think that's often something that's completely forgotten in kind of like value learning, value alignment, or kind of like saying, oh, we can just learn reward functions, or we can learn reward functions from observations, and then just kind of align with those reward functions. Because obviously that is most likely not observed in your data.
Yeah. So I assume what you mean is like these high-dimensional reward models just aren't, they're just like throwing numbers after the problem instead of actually understanding it or something like this.
So I mean, if I look at most data sets, like if you look at like manipulation data sets, for example, it's more about like, what are the actions that I execute, so to say, with my hands, and this obviously doesn't capture your thought process at all. So the question is, from like, if you just learned reward models from such data sets of observations, you might learn that, okay, I can now predict you want this object, so I will like only make this object available to you because this is exactly, I know you want this object. And hence this is kind of exactly leading to this loss of agency, or potentially leading to a loss of agency. So I think this is a very interesting area to look into.
Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah, and I guess jumping on to the next topic, it's this more exploratory, conceptual and governance perspective on agency. And yeah, curious to get just an overview there, Kat, and see what you thought.
So here, I think I have even less technical guidance. Governance is quite far from what I do. I mean, I should mention that I have worked in policy and things. I practiced law for a while, and I left it quite open because I was hoping people that do work in governance are interested in these topics could just take the reins and just go whatever they think is valuable. But the broad question really is, hey, can we think about protecting agency from like a governance perspective, right? Can we incentivize organizations to think about this problem? You release your tool out in the world, even at the kind of misuse or responsible tool development level. You should maybe we want to enforce some kind of rules. You have to have some kind of checks and balances and guides and to evaluate your model or your tools that you release. At the AI safety X risk level, definitely you would want to think more about preventing. How do you legislate against harmful, manipulative, agency depleting kind of technologies, and hopefully people have some sense of this. Maybe, so I mentioned again, it's still on the website, that the EU and I know a couple of other places I've read about it, but it's becoming explicit in the language of the legislation that, so there's a thing called dark patterns. That's this idea that you want to prevent technology companies from tricking users to engage in unwanted behavior. Right? That's the very definition of agency depletion. It's not a definition, but it's a very succinct or very clear way to put it, right? Convincing somebody to do something they don't really want, right? It's like almost like an oxymoron, but that's what manipulation really is, right? Making people think they wanted something that they don't really, it's not really in their well-being or long term. So that's happening, and I'm hoping people can also contribute to this idea, to this topic from that perspective. But yeah, and I also was hoping somebody could red team the entire idea, because at the root of the proposal of agency preservation and this kind of bigger field, what I called harm evaluation, we're not really solving, at least in the first instance, we're not really solving the classical misalignment problem. We're not really looking at, specification gaming or goal misgeneralization, right? We're not really figuring out how the mathematics of how this goes wrong, but we're just trying to define when we should worry about these kinds of failures. And maybe somebody can combine the idea here again, It doesn't have to be necessarily done in the way I'm thinking about it, but people can red team this idea that agency preservation is just maybe not useful as a tool. I would like to also hear that, and I hope others can also comment on that. To me, the foundational paper on which this hackathon is based was about the sphere of circularity, right? If we don't worry about human agency, our tools are gonna remove it from us. The technologies that we build, whether it's going to be extremely fast or slow, it's going to happen. It's just there's unfortunately a loop. We're not hardwired. Our brains, our minds are not independent of the physical world. We're not hardwired to protect everything. And so conceptually, to me, that makes a lot of sense. Whether practically how to work on it on this conceptual track, maybe people can have more ideas of how to flush this out.
Maybe you have some thoughts on this as well, Tim.
Yeah, I don't think I have too much to add here. I think it's also interesting from a perspective of basically saying, hey, if we can actually define this better, then also from a technical side, that would be very helpful. So I think there's a lot of synergy here in both the technical side and probably also the regulatory side, because without proper definitions, you can't do much. And this is kind of applying to both problems.
Yeah, I can imagine you can even make 2 submissions if you do an actual technical experiment with one of your conceptual
Oh boy,
experiments.
don't give people ideas, Esben, I think.
Ooh. Yeah. And I'm curious, do you also think of these governance interventions as more like more broadly? Is it mostly on like hard agency, hard problems of agency or something like this, protecting that, or is it also related to for example, the recent discussion on open sourcing language models? Like, well, if we open source it, everyone sort of has access to it, and humanity as a whole can see what's going on and whatnot. But at the same time, you enable a lot of misuse. And how do you see this relate to agency preservation for humanity compared to this AI or agency singularity happening with AI soon?
Catalin, do you want to go first?
I don't. Maybe I could hear what you say, because I'm a little also unclear.
Yeah, I'm also still in the thought process.
So Esben, my question is more, and maybe you can rephrase it a little bit.
Yeah. So I mean, the question in reality just came with the open source example, but there's been a bunch of discussion on this open source where, okay, should we do it or not? And a lot of the X-Risk community and the AI safety community wants it to not be open source for a bunch of obvious reasons. We have something like Worm GPT that is basically a chatbot for helping you do malevolent sort of cyber attacks, cyber offense operations. That is fine-tuned on GPTJ. So these sorts of issues can arise out of things where, okay, open source is actually like a fuzzy way to increase humanity's agency as a whole. Like, okay, we actually understand what the technology is. Everyone can see what is happening. Everyone can see what the latest AI tech is. So it was in this framing that then are the governance solutions or the governance proposals you're also looking for related to this much more broader frame of okay, this leads us towards a more human agentic world or something like that. I don't know if that was a better reframing.
It is a little bit. I mean, I'm always afraid to go on the record making political statements, but I would say that, yeah, maybe that is the right side of the coin to land on, or the history, whatever you want to call it. Maybe open sourcing really is the lesser of the evils, but I don't really know what that will pan out. Maybe not. It's not completely clear, right? But hopefully people that have access to the tools, the vast majority are working on positive things, and maybe also plugging the holes and plugging the harms. And there's just this. I mean, that's always been the case, right? Whatever new technology has been released, a lot of the time it has had a lot of misuse, right? So it's a very tough one, and I'm not really prepared. I'm not well read on the arcs of technology, to use and misuse, of course, but yeah, it's a tough one. It was a surprise question at the end, Esben.
It was mostly like a with the open source question as an example, but great that you engage with it as well. The question more being like these sorts of questions as well, covering those, and for example, saying, oh, the EU AI Act just has responsible AI and explainable AI. How should we have something called agency preserving AI, or is this a thing that where
Right.
the formalisms would be too hard to preserve there?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't. Sorry, Tim. Were you going to say something?
No, go ahead. I was still thinking.
I was just going to mention. Yeah, I think maybe as time goes on, and if we stay in this kind of open source model, I'm really just guessing now. We really will have to whatever the organizations that do create big foundational models and then train them for us, they will really have to pass some kind of minimal harm about. You can't just say, hey, it's just a tool that goes into some robot and do some language model or some of the. You really have to really do a lot more hypothetical extension of how your tool is going to be used in the near and definitely long-term future. So maybe there'll be an increased burden. That's the way I try to phrase the governance track. Increased burden as the tools become more powerful on the organizations that generate the tools to really think about not just the immediate the truthfulness of AI systems, but also their long-term kind of effect on human control and human disempowerment. So yeah, so that's where I would say that's probably where maybe there's a bottleneck or something like that we can create somewhere there, because not everyone will be able to use to train models to do specific things, and maybe that's a that would be a possible way forward.
Yeah, my take's a bit so about the open source question. So I mean, like, there's kind of all the obvious pros and cons, and I don't really think I have like a strong opinion on what is right and wrong here. Probably you will only know in hindsight what would have been the better decision. But then on the idea that you kind of pitch is like, should we have like, so say like regulations for agency preserving AI? I mean, I guess you can also phrase this a bit as like, should we kind of try to limit the impact that AI has on humans, so to say, or on how humans make decisions? And I think this sounds like a very, very reasonable idea to have.
Yeah. So you can imagine a proposal looking like, or you can't implement it into the TikTok algorithm. Maybe you can't implement these language models there because that might lead to these emergent phenomena of agency depletion or something like that. Who knows?
Or or even more addictive technologies, right? Yeah.
Yeah, without necessarily the white box that a TikTok algorithm actually has. Like, the Twitter algorithm, I think, was open sourced after Elon came on and fired all of the employees.
Sure.
Yeah, so that's more, I guess it's not more interpretable because it's still a big program, but you can actually understand the symbols it has in a more concrete way. Yeah, I guess, does any of you have like some discussion point we want to take? Otherwise, I'll just chat a bit about the challenge and the deadline and so on.
I'll go from my side.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that we're hoping that we'll get some a distribution of opinions and colorful kind of contributions to this field. It's really, if it's a nascent field, if it's something that's growing, and I'm not, obviously, you and I are not the only people that are putting this forward. There's the Prague group and a few others around the world, I think, also from this kind of control or empowerment and agency perspective. So if this field is to grow, we need a lot of diverse opinions and voices. So let's see what the submissions look like.
Yeah, I'm also very excited for both like the hard problem and the conceptual questions too, and exactly trying to get different perspectives on the same question in a sense, making sure it gets kicked off well. It's gonna be fun.
Yes, thank you all, and thank you, Tim and Esben. It's been nearly impossible to do without help. So yeah.
Yeah, perfect.